Are whistleblowers heroic? Should conservatives support the police? Is Bud Light promoting a trans ideology the same as Coors promoting gay couples? We answer these questions and more on this episode of Good Take Bad Take. Hi, friends. Welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the show where we go through our social media feeds. We find the takes that interest us, either in a good way or a bad way, and then we break them down and talk about what's good or bad about them. My name is Donald, and I'm here with my co-host, Britt. And before we get started, just a reminder to give us a follow on our socials, which are listed up here on the screen if you're watching. If you're listening, that's Good Take, Bad Take Pod on Instagram, Good Bad Take Pod on Twitter and YouTube. And give us a like and follow and a subscription while you're there. Helps us out a lot. So our first take comes from Clint Russell of Liberty Lock Pod. He tweeted out, when your government is escalating an undeclared proxy war against a nuclear power and lying about facts on the ground to the American people, there is nothing more patriotic or courageous than becoming a whistleblower. Free Jack, I'm going to mispronounce this, Teixeira, something like that. I apologize. Pardon Snowden, free Assange. What do you think about this take?
I with the caveat that I actually don't know who Jack Teixeira is, but knowing Snowden and Assange and the overall, premise that Clinton is saying, it's a great take. I mean, it's true. A lot of and it's courageous and patriotic because you are exposing, acts of deceit that are going to kill your fellow Americans. And a lot of people talk about, back in 2001 and 2003 and stuff, when we were going into Afghanistan and Iraq, and very much like the COVID pandemic hysteria, we had kind of the terrorist hysteria, and people would say, well, we just got to support our troops. And that was kind of the equivalent of, maxing, make sure you're masked and make sure you're getting the vaccine and all this stuff, support the troops. And they need us to be courageous and stuff. It's like, man, if you really wanted to be patriotic and courageous, you would bring those troops home, or you wouldn't put them in harm's way for some ulterior motive or based off of faulty information or anything like that. And I remember someone close to my life was talking about like the Iraq war, and he was very much like skeptical of the Afghanistan war, and he was very, very skeptical about Iraq. But he's like, yeah, but then Colin Powell came out and said, oh no, they definitely do, and held up the little vial at the United Nations and all this stuff. And he's like, yeah, I trusted Colin Powell, and then that's what convinced me that we should go in there. And his take was always like, well, I don't want to fight any war that I wouldn't send one of my kids to go fight, which is a very that's a very sobering and good line in the sand to have, because it basically limits you to any war that is not on your own soil, right? But if someone like Colin Powell, who you really respect, comes and says, "Oh yeah, Iraq's got nuclear weapons and they're pointing them at us," then that's how you convince people. But once we were down there, the work that Assange and Snowden and maybe Jack Teixeira did in exposing, they're like, "Oh yeah, we're not actually the heroes over there. We're not Luke Skywalker, fighting the Empire. We're actually the stormtroopers blowing up, Middle Eastern kids and women and children and all this stuff." So they did really great work. And, regardless of their whatever personal foibles they might have, regardless of whether they might have had ulterior motives or anything like that, they still exposed lies, and they brought it into the light. And that's why the regime hates them.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jack is the suspect who is recently connected with the leaks of the US's involvement in Russia and Ukraine, and the documents there that have been leaked in a Discord group.
Like about different casualty numbers and stuff.
Casualty numbers and our assessment of the Ukrainian military power and stuff. I think it's been online for a couple of months. Yeah, and I think it's funny because I think it's pertinent to the last thing you were saying, which is sort of regardless of the motive or the motivation or the driving factor. Because as far as I'm aware, I have no idea, but it might seem like this guy dropped it to sort of his gaming group, like as a flex, which is maybe not the most noble motive for this. But I think the thing that's crazy about this is first of all, the terrifying thing I will say is the response, where the White House and the military intelligence agencies are saying, like, well, how can we scrub Discord to make sure future leaks and stuff don't happen? And it's like, well, let's be real, the government should not have the power to scrub, any kind of platform, any private and communication pathway. And I'm afraid that Discord is becoming less and less private. Discord being an online communication platform for those of you who are unfamiliar. It's kind of like a forum and a chat all wrapped up into one. You can have voice chats or text chats, private messages, group messages, or even just more public forum type things. But the thing is, when you have private information and private data there, you want that to be private. And obviously, the company Discord can do that with it what it will. Up till now, it's been pretty pro privacy, although it recently had terms of service changes that make it more invasive. And so they can, ban you for things that they might deem offensive, even in DMs, which is uh, not a great thing. But even more, which makes me even more concerned about the government trying to
Mm.
look into this, right? But secondly, maybe instead of worrying about, if you're really worried, from a non-ideological standpoint, if you as an institution are worried about leaks getting out, maybe you should worry less about the means through which they're disseminated and maybe more about how the people you are trusting in your organization gets access to information that they're leaking in the first place, right? You think maybe you should, search your own soul before going to try to fix the other pathways of communication. It's like, oh my gosh, we need to have our roads checking for drunk drivers. That says the bar that's sending people out, plastered with their keys in their hand. Like maybe you should do some self introspective work. But the more important point here is, and as I think you've said, it is like important that when these leaks happen and things that of ill nature are being exposed by the US, like it can be done through noble means, it can be done through selfish or cheesy means, like what is suspected of Jack right now. But again, I don't have any particular knowledge one way or the other on that, but it doesn't matter because the facts are the facts. If you're leaking this information and it's true information, you have to grapple with that reality. And so on the one hand, I know that a lot of conservative people tend to say, well, we can't reward people like Assange or Snowden because they leak government secrets and that puts us all in danger. But on the contrary, we're in so much more
Yeah.
danger when we don't have people who are going to leak. It's like one of those things where you have, it's kind of like the little like I don't, it's not a parable, but like the little like fictional story of the teacher who tells his like kindergartners or first second graders like, hey, whatever you do, I'm going to leave the room, do not get up for any reason, and then takes a fish out of the bowl of water and puts it on the desk. And the fish is just like choking from not being able to breathe, just like flopping around until one of the kids runs up and puts it in the water, and the teacher comes back and says like, don't let the rules stop you from doing something that's right. Like, and that's kind of like what this should be. It's like, we obviously as an institution you don't want leaks, but if the institution itself is committing heinous crimes, we want to have a people, an American culture that is willing to do the quote unquote illegal thing or the wrong thing for the right cause or for the right reason.
Yeah.
You want to have leakers who are saying, hey, what the US is doing is messed up, and if the American people knew this, there would be justice, and this should be brought to light because allegedly the government is supposed to be run by the consent of the governed here. And so when they do things that have to get leaked, that's not consent of the governed.
Yeah, your point is really like doing the right thing regardless of whatever rules, because like I think about conservatives saying like, oh yeah, what Snowden did, like yes, it was right for him to expose this, in some way, or maybe what the government was doing was wrong, but he still took an oath, to do this or do that, and he was part of the organization, signed a contract. And it's so ironic to me that the programs and policies and methods that he exposed, that we all, not we, but the conservatives really supported, are now being turned on the conservatives, right? Like everyone was saying, because I was like, well, if you have nothing to, nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. It's like, well, it really just matters about who's determining what is hideable or what should be hidden. And so, yeah, so these guys, regardless of their motivations, like you're saying, are heroes. I wouldn't even say they are heroes, but their actions are heroic and good.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is the interesting thing because I think most people who are talking and thinking about these issues in a serious way recognize that life is not black and white in many cases. There are competing priorities. There are multiple hierarchies of good, right? So for instance, the example of Snowden, like you said, oh, he took an oath to not, to keep secrets or whatever for the government. So you have to measure, the the hierarchy of keeping your oath in this context more powerful than the good of exposing a criminal ring, essentially, of the NSA, right? This entire branch that is unknown, and not only unknown but explicitly lied about existing, from like James Clapper before Congress, and exposing this total abuse of not only, your own freedom, but the entire population of the United States' privacy and freedom. And you have to weigh those things. And it's kind of like one of those things where biblically, a lot of conservatives will talk about, well, it might be okay to lie in context when you're like protecting Jews from the Nazis, or they'll say Rahab from the men, the biblical example there, Rahab lying about the spies that were, she was hiding and stuff like that. And so to me, I think it's a pretty clear principle that a lot of conservatives should understand and recognize, that you actually, more important than the principle and the hierarchy of obeying the law or following the rules, is having an American culture that is doing the right thing. And I think something that conservatives really are good about and getting on, and should be getting on board with, is promoting what is good, right? Sometimes I think libertarians like to say, oh, well, freedom is the ultimate good, but I don't think that's true. I think freedom is the should be the ultimate goal of sort of the governing side of society. But as far as individual values, I don't think freedom is the ultimate good. I think it helps get to the best good, and those best goods have to be things like self-sacrifice, discipline, honesty, truth, non-aggression, those types of things. And so I think it's like with conservatives, I think that they would have a strong sense of what they view as a moral foundation, and those are the values that I think you, as a conservative, you should be promoting over the laws. Now, if you want to make the laws coincide with those, we can, go back and forth what that is. But you have to admit that as it currently stands, someone like Snowden keeping the oath to not leak information, and then witnessing the complete dishonesty and invasion of privacy that the NSA was, that if he were to keep his oath of, following the rules or the law, then he would be violating those first moral principles, which I think are more important and should be promoted more highly. Okay, we'll move to our next take here. This is a Facebook conversation. So there's a first post and then a comment reply. So the first post reads, "We have lived in our home for 35 years. Cost us less than $250,000 to buy the land and build the house. The taxable value increased by 43% this year. So it now costs us $1,500 per month for the tax. On top of this tax, I have the RTA tax on my car of $558. Who determined the boundaries for the RTA map?" And there is a reply here that reads, "Your tax most likely did not go up by 43%, but it probably did and historically has gone up. Because we prohibit an income tax, which is a far fairer tax, we depend way too much on property taxes. This harms seniors and lower or even middle income homeowners. It benefits the rich. Fears of income tax as simply addictive are reasonable, but redesigning the whole system could help if we could get it done. Our system of taxation is terrible. That is not the same as saying the government is collecting too much money. I don't think they are, but they may be getting it from the wrong sources and harming many homeowners. Some are even losing homes." Reading this one has me so triggered. What is your response to this
Well,
thread?
this is actually a next door post. I crawled on there to look up some information about some happenings in my neighborhood that I'd seen, and scrolled across this. And whenever there's something about homeowners tax, property tax, I always love reading the comments because everyone hates it except for a few people, and usually they're not landowners. But for those of you who don't live in Washington, we don't have an income tax.
We
The
do now.
yes,
We do now.
yeah,
We
yes,
shouldn't.
yes. Yeah, I'm sure you'll get to that.
We don't have a traditional income tax. Yeah.
We don't have the traditional income tax like a lot of other states do. We have sales tax, and then the RTA is the Regional Transit Authority. So, kind of funny side note on that is we actually sued like the people of Washington said, "Hey, we don't want this tax," and sued the government saying, "We don't, take our car tabs off of your, bring them back down to what they were." And then the government used our tax dollars to fight us in court, and then decided that actually this is a fair tax and we're going to keep it. So Washington sucks in that way, as do any place that has a government doing taxes. But obviously, I think the person's reply is a bad take. Any take that says that's a much fairer tax, or the worst part of it is this is not the same as saying the government is collecting too much money. It's like, no, the government always collects too much money. The second they collect $1 from you, they have collected too much money because they never earned that. They didn't create it. That is too much money by definition. So yeah, I mean, the property taxes in Washington are awful because because of, I had other people on here posting like, oh, it's not a tax thing, it's a housing market issue. It's like, yeah, the housing market issue created by various government policies, and then at the macro level, obviously created by the Federal Reserve and all of those financial and monetary policies. So there's a lot to go through, and I'll let you go since you were so triggered.
Well, just to tack on to your last point there, it's a housing market issue. Okay, well, let's look at affordable housing in Washington. Recognize that about $144,000 on the medium priced home in Washington, $144,000 of the cost to build that home is from regulations alone.
What?
Yes. So not the
For,
not the
for
final.
affordable housing?
Yeah, no, I'm just talking about how the median home in Washington, $144,000 of the building cost comes from regulatory burdens. That was a study done by, I think, the BIAW. They reported on it at least.
Wow.
So yeah, they want to talk about like, oh, it's not government or taxes, and it's like, okay, well, even if you're gonna say it's not taxes directly, it's regulations, which is also the government's wheelhouse. The other thing that triggers me so much, one, uh, they talk about they talk about this like, oh, we just need an income tax and then everything's fair. But everyone who actually, and maybe this person, the way that they're responding may seem like they might be more open than our actual legislators are, but every person who talks about implementing an income tax, or charging the richer more, that does nothing to help the lower end. So what we would say is, okay, if you want to help people on the bottom end, because they're talking about a far fairer tax, drop our sales tax, reduce our sales tax. That actually helps people on the lower end disproportionately. Then they say, oh, well, the government isn't collecting too much money. One, I think your point is correct. As if they're collecting money, it's too much. But two, if you just want to look at it as a numbers game, in Washington state, well, shoot, Washington's growth over the past, I think it's like 10 or 20 years, has gone up every single budgetary session. Every 2 years, the forecast has increased. Over COVID, we had more money. Even in a terrible economy, we had projected more money than we did in the previous years. The budget forecast came in this year, and there was a lot of like, oh man, it's lower than expected. But it was the budget forecast came in lower than expected from a prior projection, but it's still more than we were getting last year. So Washington, the money that the state is getting from taxpayers has gone up every single time. And the problem is legislators just spend it all. So if you were actually concerned about this, and if you actually believed all this, the answer is clear. It's take some of the money that is forecast, that's going to be coming in from existing revenues without raising taxes, and one, allocate it back to property owners. Two, allocate it in a sales tax cut to people there. Whatever your thing is, you don't need to raise taxes. You actually don't need to restructure our tax system for one that is fair or not. And the government still has more money than they did the prior budget to spend without changing anything. But they will always gaslight you into thinking that, oh, we just don't have enough money, because they promise and overspend.
Yeah, my favorite part of this one is the reason we have a property tax is because we prohibit an income tax, as if like as if we got an income tax, like they force that upon us, that they would take away property taxes. Like most other places have both property tax and an income tax as well.
Yes.
So it's Yeah, they're going to have both. Repealing a tax almost never ever happens. So the only way to ensure that you have less taxes to never have them in the first place, and to severely limit that stuff, and just trust that if people want something, they're going to figure out how to band together and fund it themselves. We don't need middlemen dispersing that. That is really nuts though about the $140,000 in regulatory compliance. And so that's like stuff like getting your house up to code and
Yeah, I think it's like getting your house up to code. I think it's making like I mean like just for as an example, I think it's in Seattle. There's a regulation, and I don't know if this is in that 144,000, but there's literally a license you have to pay. It's like I don't know, like $140 or 260, somewhere in that range. It's it's not like a multi, but it's a vacancy check permit. You have to get a permit to say yes, I went to my house and it is empty. You have to
yeah.
pay the government money for that.
Yeah, and if
For it
it's
to
a
say
contractor, then you're paying for the labor and overhead markup on that. So that $260 permit, it costs you actually like $900 at the end of the day.
exactly. And so
Yeah,
it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, if is it good to make sure your house is empty? Sure. Does it need to be a government permit that costs $260? No. And or 900, in the long thing. And it's like, okay, yeah, that might be one little bit, but one that disproportionately impacts lower income housing because obviously it's not only on rich houses you have to make sure, it's on all of them. And the richer people are going to be able to afford that more. So you want to talk about, not fairer penalties. Regulations are the things that are penalizing the people who have lower income to dispense in the first place, because these regulations don't increase in scale the higher the building cost. So when you have all of these flat fee regulations that are going to give you a cost one way or the other, um on a building, well, now as a contractor you are now incentivized to create higher bid housing, because your margins are going to be higher just based on the fact that you have flat fees and flat costs from all these regulations. So they always talk about, oh, we need affordable housing. That's one of the problems right there, is all of the regulations make it so that it's less profitable to create that in the first place.
yeah. Any housing. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But it becomes subsequently less, profitable because the regulation fees are flatter, or are flat. And so your margins just shrink when you go onto
Mhm.
low income housing, or just affordable housing in general.
Hmm.
Okay.
Not nothing more.
We'll move on to our next take here. This one comes from a declaration of memes, meme Twitter. This one reads: Conservatives should probably become familiar with the reasons libertarians do not support the police. Generally speaking, it is not that we oppose police doing the few good things that they do: stop/solve violent crimes, provide security, etc. Libertarians' objections to the police stems from the fact that it is the main job of police officers to enforce the laws of government against the people. Every law that violates your liberty and rights passed along by the Democrats or Republicans is being enforced by the police. The police obeyed the government and shut down the churches and the mom and pop stores. The police let riots happen when their masters ordered them to. In a libertarian society, we would have robust protections for self-defense, access to arms and private security, and private detectives contracted to take care of the violent crime issues that do occur. Besides, a mugging, a home invasion, a random attack on the streets usually happen in seconds. Assuming that you are lucky enough to even have the opportunity to call the police, the criminal will be long gone before the cops arrive. The only thing you can truly count on for protection is being proficient with firearms and self defense. We believe in liberty, much like the founding fathers of America did. What is your take on this post?
This is great. Really well laid out. I think really it looks like it's one of those more Twitter show more
Yeah, it is.
tweets.
It
But
is.
it's really well laid out. Like if I hit expand and read this, I'd be, oh, this is good. I think it's a nice outreach to conservatives from our kind of side of the political ideology. Um, to my favorite part about this, and a point that I usually make with my conservative friends, is that the police officers I like to say to my friends, police officers, to me, the ratio of good police officers to bad police officers is about the ratio of good politician to bad politician in a lot of ways, because it's not necessarily that you're like, it's like, oh, they're all bad. It's just a form. It's a symptom of the position that attracts bad people to it, and then amplifies their badness. Right. So you get a police officer. They can, if they pull you over, they can hypothetically do anything they want to you in that moment, with a chance of potentially getting away with it. Right. And if you fight back or anything like that, then they have license to kill you. And their main function, again, is not to protect. It's not to provide security, it's not to stop and solve crimes. That's an aspect that they do sometimes, but their primary mandate, and the one that they always uphold, no matter what, is to enforce the laws and the dictates of the people that are in charge of them. There's a Supreme Court case. I think it was in early 2000s, but basically reaffirmed that the police don't have a duty to help you if you're being hurt. This is evidenced by during Seattle's kind of got some really bad homeless issues, and I was working with some property management companies down there, and I was talking to a property manager, and he's like, "Yeah, we don't go walk down that alleyway because a police officer told us that they're not going to come protect us if we go down there. Like they could see us being beaten up and all this stuff, but short of us, someone pulling a gun or a knife on us, they're not going to come help us." And so it's like that's what your tax dollars pay for. That's what your honoring the police gets you. It gets them cowardly saying, "No, we're not going to come help you." Or at the best case scenario, you have good police that just refuse to enforce the laws, but most of them still do, right? Like these guys came around, shut down stores, shut down everyone that was not complying with COVID. And then we've been seeing instances like in New York City now where people who do try to protect themselves, like in that guy, the parking garage attendant who wrestled the gun away from one of the robbers and shot him, the police arrested him, right? So even when you do take matters into your own hands, your own protection into your own hands, and do a good job, they are still going to get you, even though they were never going to protect you in the first place. So in general, the police are bad. It's the bad stuff about police is a feature; it's not a bug, and it's a feature of the position that's been created.
Yeah, that's exactly right. To your point on the cops refusing to go down that aisle, that just makes me think of, if anyone's ever listened to Libertas, Dave Smith's comedy special. He has a whole bit on talking with his friend who said, "Well, the police work for us." He's like, "No, they don't.
No, they
What are
don't.
you talking about? You can't get them to do stuff for you." um it's a pretty good bit, but yeah, I that's right. I think that when there are examples of, oh well, my police chief defied the COVID lockdowns or whatever. That's great. That's awesome. But that's the exception that proves the rule. The fact that there were people sharing their letters online almost almost
Yeah,
amplifies the very fact that it's like they had to do that. It wasn't like this expected thing like, oh, the politicians are at it again. Fortunately, the police will, adhere to the Constitution or whatever, principle you want to, as a conservative, you might be prone to cling to. It's like, does anyone in Washington State realistically think that even their most, Chehalis or Eastern Washington or most defiant cop is seriously going to defy the gun law that's going to be passed that prevents the transfer of assault, quote unquote, assault weapons? I don't think anyone even realistically thinks that even the most red pilled conservative policeman will fight it. They might turn their eyes away for a time, but then it's only a matter of time before that person retires and a new cop takes their place who's more than willing to just uphold the law as it is. If the politicians were treated as the powerless scum that they should be treated as, then the cops and the cops were actually loyal to the things that I think conservatives wish they were loyal to, then it wouldn't be such a big deal when a non-constitutional bill gets passed,
yeah,
right? Because everyone would know, oh well, the police will never enforce this. But that's not it is. They don't, the police don't work for us. They don't answer to us. They're not accountable to us. It's all through the politicians and then their own organization of which gives them a power complex because they know that their peers will most likely let them off the hook whenever possible, which I think has been less and less available with body cam footage, because that adds a measure of transparency that the public generally gets to see. So, I do really like this take. I think he's right in that we don't disagree with the idea of stopping and solving violent crimes, providing security. These are good ends. We just think that
Yeah.
there are better means for them.
Yep.
Okay, moving to our next take here. This one comes from the Libertarian Party of Texas, maybe my least favorite state affiliated Libertarian Party. And they tweet out, nobody should have to flee an authoritarian state to get treatment or avoid mandates. Your medical treatments are between you and your doctor. No politicians needed. Hashtag medical freedom. And this links to an article that says Austin couple travels out of Texas to get, quote, medically necessary abortion. What do you think about this, Britt?
Oh, they're so annoying. It's a bad take. I mean, you kind of showed our hand when you said they're your least favorite.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
such bad. It's so bad. I'll expand upon the article a little bit because I think that will help. But basically,
Please
this
do.
couple, they found out they were pregnant. They were actually trying to get pregnant, and so they wanted this kid. And then at week 17, they found that there was, I don't really know how to pronounce it, but basically a fluid bubble on the back of the kid's head, their daughter's head, which meant that they would likely not survive being born. Or if they were born, they would have some issues potentially. So they wanted to get an abortion at week 17. Texas doesn't allow it unless there's a threat to the life of the mother, and so they had to travel out of the state to Colorado, and then because the state that they reside in and the insurance they're on, basically said, oh, well, it wasn't medically necessary. They had to pay out of pocket to kill their kid. So, anyways, this there's a libertarian side of it, which is like these guys. I mean, I don't really know much about the Libertarian Party of Texas's positions on the COVID stuff, but I have a feeling they were pretty annoying about it all, and maybe we're even pro-vax in some ways. Um, that is apples and oranges when it comes to killing a human being versus choosing what medical preventions you choose to put in your body. You know, there is an argument to be made that as a private business could say, hey, if you don't have the COVID vaccine, we don't want you in here because most of our clientele are old or something like that. I'm actually, and we've said it before, and we're very consistent on it. We're all for individuals and private businesses and organizations deciding what they're, on their private property, what goes on and who's allowed to come on there. And it goes both ways, right? Like in the same way that someone that wants people to be vaccinated can say only vaccine people can come on, someone that doesn't care for those type of people can say you have to be unvaccinated to come on the property. I think both are pretty stupid. And especially now with all the data that we've got and the data that we had at the time, it makes that stupid. But that is not the same as killing a human being, right? And that's what, if we're going to have government do anything, like, okay, well, let's defend the most vulnerable out there, right? The people that literally have no ability to speak for themselves, like a little child. And the condition that this couple had, I can't speak to their specific situation, but it carries a 55% survival rate post birth. So there's a chance, right, that this kid could survive. They might have some complications. They might be somewhat mentally inhibited, but we don't justify killing human beings for those reasons in any other scenario when they're outside of the womb. The only time we justify it is when they're inside the womb.
Yeah, I think you're totally right here. You know, I'm not sure what the state of Texas's policy is in the case of mother's life threatened. It sounds like it would be allowed if the mother's life is threatened. And I think there is a lot of nuance to be
Yeah.
had in terms of the conversation. Um but I think that nuance becomes a little bit less nuanced when you consider if the mother's life is not reasonably in danger. Think about it almost like the trolley car incident where it's like, you know, um if you see a train trolley and you see the lever, um you can't see which switcher the trolley's on, and you don't know that if pulling the track, you don't know if you're going to save the lives if you pull it. Or maybe like if you leave it, you're not sure whether or not they'll survive. But if you pull the lever, it's a shorter distance but it'll definitely kill the person tied to the tracks. It's like I don't see I don't see how you can justify taking the action that definitely kills the person, definitely kills that child, when there is a chance for it to survive. It is not a death sentence. Now, is it difficult?
Even if there's no
Absolutely.
chance, right?
Yeah,
Like,
even yeah, there's a difference. Like seeing a strong gust of wind of someone leaning over a rail, take someone and topple them over is ethically different than you going and shoving them over because you see the gust of wind is coming.
yeah, like like even if this, like, let's just say the ultrasound showed that for whatever reason they could tell with this specific instance of this condition that it was 100% guaranteed that the kid would die upon birth or die shortly after birth, like that still, like, doesn't give you permission to just go kill them, because you have some sort of need for convenience or you want to move on to having the next kid or whatever. I'm not inferring the couple's motivations, but like it has to be out of convenience, a sense of convenience. If there's no threat to the life of the mother, which there isn't in this scenario, then it's purely because you have some ulterior motive in terms of like to get that fetus out of there, rather than being like, hey, you know what? We're going to give this baby the entire dignity and life that it deserves for as long as nature allows this thing to survive. And I speaking as someone that's going to be a parent in the future, like I would give every single second that I have to, or I give everything I have to have another few seconds or minutes with my kid, to keep them alive. And so it's just really, it's really sinister to me that they take killing children and make it an issue about freedom. It's like, no, that this is one of the least free choices you can make, or least pro freedom choices you can make, because you're literally just taking someone's life away when they have no voice to advocate for themselves.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's extremely cringeworthy of the LP to
Yeah.
ignore the Libertarian Party of Texas, to ignore all of this debate and then just go on the hard line that the state has no role in this. Because one, it's like if this were any other medical issue where there isn't a life at stake, I would completely agree with this take. But the problem is they obstinately ignore the data, they ignore the science, to use that cringy phrase, thanks to COVID, and they ignore the nuance of the conversation. So they just look like ideologues pushing a point rather than people who want to actually promote freedom or good ideas in a real world scenario. It's just antagonistic. So that's why I don't like it. If you were a partisan and you put this post out there because it's your talking point, I get it. If this comes from the Democrats, I get it. But the Libertarian Party is supposed to have ideals and it's supposed to have a sense of like, we're not just partisan hacks. We acknowledge reality. We acknowledge what works best, and we acknowledge that that's not true the same for everyone. But it seems like that nuance of is lost on them a little bit when it comes to this. In just because they want to push this idea so hard, they become ideologues for this talking point rather than for the reality of the situation, which is that there's a human life involved.
Yeah, they're trolling with the human life, being
Yeah.
on the other end of it, which is
Yeah, exactly. Which
kind
is
of, it's
not
just
never a good look.
ugly. Yeah.
Okay, and we'll go to our last post here. And this one's a little bit longer. This, of course, comes on the heels of the entire Bud Light promotion of that trans male to female individual promoting Bud Light and their financials crashing. So Matt Walsh starts off tweeting, "The financial damage we've done to Anheuser-Busch, I believe that's how you pronounce that, is a huge victory. We just need to keep it up. Corporations that go woke and betray their own customer base need to feel the pain. They never have in the past. Maybe that's changing. It would be a massive game-changing shift if so. I hope the conservatives who are complaining that the Bud Light thing is stupid and we should just ignore Dylan Mulvaney can see that they miscalculated and join the effort here. We're actually making a woke corporation pay a price. If you can't see the value in that, I don't know what to say." And then there's a reply, and this, I mean, I kind of want to address that take too, just because I think that is also an interesting thing to address. But there's a reply here that says, "Where were you in 2013 when Coors dropped this?" And it shows an ad promoting two gay men. And then there's a reply to that with someone saying, The gay men are not harming children here or taking over women's bathrooms and sports or compelling others to speak reality denying pronouns. It's not the same. There's a lot to take here. You want to take on the latest take or Matt Walsh's take? Just give me your thoughts.
Okay, I'll take the last two ish. I'll take the
Yeah.
last one, the
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
the French Canadian flag in it. And it looks like she's verified too, or Twitter Blue. So yeah. Anyways, uh, her post again is the one that says, the gay men are not the ones harming children here, or taking women's bathrooms, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember back in 2000, must have been 2009, 2010, when this was kind of the forefront of the culture being pushed, having discussions, and a lot of people made fun of conservatives saying, using the slippery slope argument, right? It's like, hey, if we legalize this, if we become okay with this type of lifestyle as a culture, then it's going to lead eventually to people, pedophilia and bestiality and other sorts of things like that. And I remember they got made so much fun of, right? And I even made some of those, I believe, kind of takes. And when I got made fun of, like it made me rethink it a little bit more. But now that we've got hindsight, it seems like, if you start bending reality, if you start, according to your and I's view of the world, like not living according to traditional concepts, according to design by the God that created us, that it becomes easier and easier and easier to live further and further outside of the design and pervert it more. And so I think a lot of the conservatives that were saying those types of things back in 2008 about where this would lead, obviously they've been proven right. And I think it's a function of that. And therefore, I think this person is wrong and it's a bad take, right? Like, yes, maybe the gay men and, that entire community is not harming children directly right now, or directly, being part of pedophilia. But their shift of the Overton window, our denial of reality and our denial of God's design has caused it so that children eventually will end up harmed, right? You can't, anything that you choose to do affects everyone else in the community in some way or the other. It's Solzhenitsyn's whole thing about like, hey, we were all responsible for the Soviet Union, right? We all either decided to not say something when we should have, or we said something we should not have said, and that all of that contributes eventually to mass casualty and mass awfulness and mass, degradation of society. And so I think this person's wrong. I think that I don't know where Matt Walsh was in 2013, but I'm sure if there was a Matt Walsh that had the mindset that he has today back in 2013, he probably would have opposed that as well. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe you agree or disagree, but that's my take on that last one.
I would say I agree with you, and I agree even to a stronger point because the stats that are considered maybe less than palatable for people to discuss is the fact that it's some shockingly high percent. I want to say around 43% in some studies, and that could be high, but of gay men who were molested by an older gay man.
Wow.
And it's like how that culture has, and so much of gay men culture, which again they don't want to talk about, it is involved in some form of like grooming like that. And so I find this last take so funny. Like the gay men are not harming children here or taking over women's bathrooms reports. Like those are the only ways in which you can define the paradigm here. Like that's the only way to define the debate is the very specific issues that the trans issue brings up, like pronouns or reality denying. If we want to talk about reality denying, let's talk about reality denying. You know what else is reality denying? Redefining the idea of what a sexual relationship is and should be, what the purpose of a sexual relationship is. All of these things have their roots in reality, and that was redefined entirely by I would say the sexual revolution of the 60s, which ushered in to say, no, sex isn't primarily about procreation and building a family. It's about your own gratification in the moment. And of course, that's not to say that before this these types of things didn't exist, but it is to say that before this I think the role of sex and relationships and marriage and all that was a little bit more clear about what its true purpose is. So it's funny because this post here shifts the goalpost continually. And if all of the conservatives, and I don't know where this person is politically on this spectrum, but if conservatives follow this line of thinking, then trans people will be okay when the bestiality crowd gets moving more, because well, at least we're not harming non-consenting individuals, and et cetera. You can always shift that goalpost. The one thing I also want to talk about with Matt's take here is I've always been a little bit annoyed by this go woke get broke idea, in that not how Matt's saying here. I think Matt actually has a good take, but what I've always been annoyed by is the application of this sort of taking for granted that a lot of conservatives have, where they say, "Oh, go woke, get broke." Like, this Disney movie had a gay reference in it and it flopped. Oh man, that's proof. And I think usually, one, it's because the way that people promote woke things is very transparent, right? I think we've talked about this before, where it's a shallow caricature, or it's a shallow plot, because it's obviously servicing to promote a woke ideology rather than a rich narrative. So I've always been uncomfortable with that narrative a little bit, because it's like, I don't think it's specifically that they went woke. It's not like people are saying, "Oh, there's a gay reference, I'm boycotting." It's usually like, "Oh, that is this is a shallow movie and it was bad anyway." And maybe that's because they focused on the gay thing, but that's not necessarily the primary reason, right? But also, that always rubbed me the wrong way, because it always seemed to say that, the consequence of going woke is getting broke, versus Matt's call here, which I think is so critical, which is to say, no, no, no. If they go woke, make them broke, right? Like, the idea of, like, vote with your dollars. And even if you don't like the idea of, like, oh, go woke, get broke, I think that the concept specifically of, you know, show the marketplace of ideas culturally what is and isn't important, promote the things that are good and true, and then this kind of, like, go woke, get broke thing can happen. And you should galvanize your base to, stand up, have morals, boycott things that are, defying the service of your values. But I think what's more important is promoting the actual values. And I'm not saying Matt is ignoring that point here. I just like that this is the go woke get broke thing in Matt's worldview is a call to action, not a you do this, and then this naturally follows, which I think is the correct application, because I think go woke get broke has been a misapplication in the past from some conservatives.
It's so interesting to me that this happened with Bud Light. Like,
Yeah.
of all the things, for conservatives and people to get galvanized about, and people to be like, I'm just not buying that. Like, I literally don't think I've ever bought Bud Light ever in my life. I don't think I've ever even held one.
Yeah.
So much less drank one. But yeah, it's kind of crazy that this is what it's over. And I really like what you're saying about that, the distinction of, like, well, go woke and you'll go broke, like, is much different. And in that, Matt Walsh's take is basically saying, like, hey, if you go woke, people do not like that. Your audience does not like that. You do not have product market fit with this marketing message, and we're going to make you pay for it. That is much different, and it has something to say about the values that are being put out there, not just the current value, but future values as well. Than just saying, like, oh well, it's just people don't like woke stuff and they're not drawn to pay for it. It's like, no, we are actively antagonistic and against this. It's a much more aggressive stance, and I think it's a good one. To
Well,
be
and I
honest with
think
you.
it's also a libertarian. It's a libertarian idea, right? The idea that it's like, if you don't like a business doing something, don't outlaw it, don't make it illegal, just don't buy it. Make it go broke, right? Show vote with your dollars, which I think is the free market solution. And I think that, again, my critique of libertarians earlier, where it's just like, oh, freedom's the only index point of value. No, I think you need to also promote the values that you want to see. It's not, it's, you know, say, hey, I don't like this company doing that, and promote the alternative, so that it's not just you in a vacuum. It's like you saying, we're going to build the culture I want, not through force and not through,
Mhm.
you know, forcing others to obey, but by convincing others to cherish these values, demonstrating their values and stuff like that. And then, and once you've built that up, then the marketplace of ideas gets refined and better, because more people are voting with their dollars and stuff like that. So I think Matt's actually kind of embracing a little bit of a libertarian idea here,
Yeah.
which is great.
Yeah, I we'll see. I hope that one, Anheuser-Busch, the parent company of Bud Light, comes out and says, sorry, we're taking that down. We won't do it again. Basically, because then it signals that they are more afraid of the backlash from conservatives and people that hold more traditional viewpoints, than the woke marketing VP that put this there in the first place. or two, that other companies take light of this, and it's like basically no other beer company ever again does something similar to this, and then I think victory can be declared on at least this battle. But regardless of that, people that talk about like, well, how would libertarianism or free market, or how do markets solve things like racism? Like, what if a company didn't want to let black people come in, to their store or something like that? It's like, well, regardless of which side of this issue you fall on, there's a group of people that feel very strongly about a certain moral issue, as in that it's right or wrong, and they, through spontaneous organization, were basically able to cost that company $5 billion. If that's not significant, or if that's not, the market saying something, and again, it might not overcome this exact one, but it's like someone threw a punch, right? It's like you're in this fight at this point. The market does have mechanisms for controlling moral behavior, and it's much more peaceful, right? Like, I would much rather Bud Light, this battle be taken on the fact that, like, hey, Bud Light might lose money, than for there to be some law enacted out there that says Bud Light can't or can do this, and if they don't adhere to that, then you got the government thugs on their doorstep trying to arrest them or something similar to that, which is what all laws end up being. So this is a much more peaceful, a much more right, and a much more effective way to guide moral behavior, or to influence moral behavior, than the alternative.
Absolutely right. Couldn't agree more.
Cool.
All right. Well, I think that's it for this episode. So thank you guys so much for tuning in and checking us out. Make sure to share with your friends. Enjoy. If you've enjoyed this episode, give us a like, a share, comment, all that good stuff. Send us any takes that you may want to see critiqued, and we'll catch you on the next one.